Okay, good afternoon. I want to go ahead and get started on this webinar for today. Welcome to the Access and the Georgia Milestones, Resources and Strategies for Extended or Math Extended Responses. This is the high school session number 2. This month it is a little different than the previous month where instead of having the individual grade levels being highlighted, I've combined the high school session, which we will cover the ninth and the 10th grade assessment items today. So let's go ahead and get started. But before we move any further, I just want to recap what happened last month as far as how the webinars are set up. Each webinar, of course, is about 30 minutes, and I am presenting assessment items from a highlighted resource. The resource has been a excellent resource recommended from the Georgia DOE. Of course, I will let you know what that resource is once we look at the assessment items. Also, you will be provided with the standard that the assessment item is related to, the lesson essential question, the standards for mathematical practice that are aligned to that assessment item, and of course, provide you with some student work. Before we continue, let's talk about the norms. The first norm, of course, is you will be muted during the presentation, and this is just to decrease the background noise that we may experience in our different locations. Also, you may type in questions during the presentation. Of course, since the webinar is only 30 minutes, I may not be able to get to everyone's questions, but you are able to still type in those questions, and I will consolidate those questions and provide your answers back via email. And lastly, at the end of each of the presentations, there will be a link to the recording uploaded to the West Georgia RESA website. To access the recordings, travel to the website. There is a services tab at the top left corner. If you click on that tab and you go down to recorded webinars, then you'll be able to see all of the previous webinars for math and ELA, and you can access those at your earliest convenience. All right, the ninth grade standard, we're going to go ahead and get started with that, is we're going to be looking at standard A.REI.6, and it says solve systems of linear equations exactly and approximately, focusing on pairs of linear equations and two variables. Now, this is the standard that is covered in Unit 2 in the coordinate algebra curriculum. So we should be either just finished this standard or right around the time of starting this standard. The lesson essential question for this standard is, how do you write and solve a system of linear equations in two variables? Okay, the standards for mathematical practice. Again, these are those standards that we as teachers should be demonstrating in our classroom, as well as demonstrating or guiding our students into being able to demonstrate the student behaviors that are related to these standards for mathematical practice. We always want to highlight standard 1, which says make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. This is a standard that as teachers we must demonstrate in each and every lesson that we present to our students. Standard 2 says reason abstractly and quantitatively. So once again, we are going to be looking at a system of linear equations. Standard 4 says model with mathematics. If students are able to take a piece of the word problem, actually, translate it where they can either create some symbols and create some pictures to help them understand the problem, that'd be great. And lastly, standard 6, which says attend to precision. Of course, standard 6 again is one of those standards that we should be demonstrating in our lesson each and every time that we present a new lesson to our students. Okay, the ninth grade extended response assessment, once again, just a real quick recap before we move any further, is Last month, I highlighted just constructive response. So those may be those short answer types that we may see, of course, in our frameworks, or if we just create some type of prompt, a prompt that we create ourselves. But with the extended response, this may be a more in-depth type of question. It may have at least 3 or 4 parts that are required of the student to answer. So we are going to be looking at this. And for the ninth grade extended response assessment item, it says a chef is making 20 pounds of fruit salad to sell in his shop. The chef will use only grapes and blueberries in the fruit salad. Let X and Y be defined as follows. X equals the number of pounds of grapes the chef will use. Y, the number of pounds of blueberries the chef will use. A, it wants the student to write an equation in terms of X and Y that can be used to represent the total number of pounds of fruit salad the chef will make. It goes on to say grapes cost $2.50 per pound and blueberries cost $4 per pound. The chef spent a total of $59 for grapes and blueberries for the fruit salad. B, it says write an equation in terms of X and Y that can be used to represent the total cost in dollars of the fruit salad. And C says use your answers from parts A and B to determine the number of pounds of grapes and the number of pounds of blueberries the chef will use to make the fruit salad. Show or explain how you got your answer. So we're going to look at some student work, but in order to guide and help your students to be able to answer the entire question, a suggestion would be, of course, is to maybe take a piece of the extended response assessment item and maybe use it over a few days of instruction to help the kids build up that ability to answer those 3 parts at once. Okay, of course, some strategies to address the problem. I have used the same problem solving framework throughout the series of webinars. And once again, this is not the only problem solving framework that can be used to help students solve. I've chosen this one because I feel that it can be used in different aspects in our classes, whether we want to use it as a whole group framework for the class, if we want to use it for individuals, small groups, if we want to use it on skill work, or if we want to use it on actual performance tasks. And I think it's relevant to all of those. So the first question in the framework that has been adopted from Robert Kaplinski is, what 2 quantities do you have to show a relationship between? And of course, you can revamp this and you can adapt it to whatever the assessment item is for that particular class period that you are using it in. The next one is, what are you trying to show or explain? And having the kids to, give this to you either verbally or written is good to always have them write these things down. What guesses do you have? Just have them to kind of, just throw a guess out there just to create that dialogue in your classroom, just to see, where the kids' thoughts are as far as their understanding of what is being asked. Next is, what do you already know from the problem? This, of course, is specific things that the student will write out or be able to pull out of the problem to help them solve that problem. Next, what do you need to know to solve the problem? Next, of course, is provide all of your work while working on a problem. Of course, we should always provide some section or something where the students are able to write down all of their work, a section that may be right after the problem or on the back of a worksheet that we may be using, but just having them to write it down, and so they can have this area to kind of guide them to the answer. And lastly, what is your conclusion and how did you reach that conclusion? At this point, we want the students to actually be able to write their answer down in complete sentences as far as what conclusion that they come up with as far as their answer and how did they get that. But we want this to be a written statement. On the Georgia Milestones in the spring, the students are going to be graded off of their process of getting to the answer, their written explanations. So that's why we want to build them up to be able to answer these types of questions. All right, let's look at student number 1, their score at work. This student scored a 4 points out of 4 points. And again, I did not provide a rubric for you this month. I am highlighting the resource from Massachusetts Assessment sample items that have been used on previous tests, and they did not necessarily have a rubric, but I would suggest if you're going to, use the assessment items, just create the rubric yourself or create the rubric with your students beforehand before you actually present them with this assessment item. So it's good for them to know what they're going to be graded on, how they're going to be graded, and how many points they're going to earn for their thoughts and the process and their actual explanation. So on the first, remember question A said write an equation in terms of X and Y that can be used to represent the total number of pounds of fruit salad the chef will make. Also, as we look through the answers that the students presented, think about those standards for mathematical practice that we previously talked about and determine the ones that are demonstrated in the student's answer, and also what feedback would we have provided to them as teachers if we were actually grading these ourselves. So the answer for A that the student came up was X plus Y equals 20. And the other part B, it says write an equation in terms of X and Y that can be used to represent the total cost in dollars of the fruit salad. Well, remember, grapes cost $2.50 per pound and blueberries cost $4 per pound. So for B, the student had $2 or 250x plus 4y equals 59. And that represents the $2.50 for the grapes, and the $4 4y represents the $4 per pound for the blueberries. And then the 59 is the total cost that the chef paid for both the grapes and the blueberries. And then C, it says use your answers from parts A and B to determine the number of pounds of grapes and the number of pounds of blueberries the chef will use to make fruit salad. Show or explain how you got your answer. So let's look at this student's work. It says the chef used 14 pounds of grapes and 6 pounds of blueberries. So what the student used is they took the first equation, the x plus y equals 20, and then they solved it for x. And what they did is they turned around and they substituted the value of x into the second equation, which was 250 times x plus 4y equals 59. They used the distributive property. 250 times 20 gave you 50, and then 250 times a negative y, which gave you minus 250y plus 4y equals 59. And they went on to solve for y, and y came out to be 6 pounds. Remember, y represents the blueberries. So and they had to find the number of pounds for the blueberries and the grapes. So the student used that answer for the blueberries and went back to the original x plus y equals 20 and substituted in 6 to come out with 14 pounds for the grapes. Okay, this student also scored a 4 points out of 4. And we see that they came up with the x plus y equals 20 for part A as well. And for part B, they came up with $2.50 X plus $4 Y equals $59. Now, this student took a different approach for part C when they had to find the number of pounds for grapes and for blueberries. So they used the system 250X plus 4Y equals 59. And what they chose to do is to multiply the negative 1 throughout that first equation, because the student chose to eliminate the y variable instead of the x variable. And so the second one is they took 1x plus 1y equals 20, which was the original x plus y equals 20. And once again, they multiplied that equation throughout by 4. So if you see, they came up with negative 250x plus negative 4y equals negative 59. And then when they distributed the 4 to the x plus y, they came out with 4x plus 4y equals 80. Then they eliminated the 4y, and they were left with 1.50x equals 21, or they combined the two linear equations in two variables and was left with x was equal to 14 pounds of grapes. And once again, the student went back and substituted the x value, which is 14, into the 1x plus 1y equals 20 equation, and then solved for y and came up with 6 pounds for the blueberries. So if you're looking at this, and we are looking at different ways that the students are coming up with their answers, and we just want to be able to use the same assessment item or something similar to evaluate our students in the same manner. All right, student number 3 scored student work. They received 3 points out of 4 points, and we see that for answer A, they came out with the same as previous two students, which was x plus y equals 20. B, they came up with x plus y equals 59. And just by looking at this and the note, in order for them not to earn the full points that they could have, the student did not add the amounts of each fruit into their answer to B. So they only just switched out from A to B, just the 20 and the 59. And then for answer choice C, the student explained the number of pounds of grapes the chef got was 14 pounds, and the number of pounds for blueberries was 6. And they provided their work for that, where they have 250 times 14, which is 35, and then 4 times 6 is 24, and that gave them the 20 pounds that they were required to use. And also, when you add the amounts with those pounds, 35 plus 24 gave them 59. All right, student number 4, they scored 2 points out of 4 points. And we want to look at A, and we see that 20, this student came up with 20 equals the x plus y, which is what the other students have come up with. And then on B, they have 59 is equal to 4 y plus 250x, which is what the previous students came with as well. Now, we look at their answer choice for C when they actually have to use those previous equations to figure out the number of pounds for grapes and blueberries. We see that the student has 59 is equal to 4y plus 250x. And what they are trying to do is actually solve for one of the variables, the two variable equations. They're trying to solve for one of the variables, and they just are not understanding that the 59 and the 4y, you're not going to divide immediately that way. And so, of course, their answer is going to be off. All right, the next one is student number 5, and they scored 1 point out of 4 points. And we look at answer choice A, and we see that 10x plus 10y equals 20. And if we go down, we continue to read the student's explanation of maybe what they were thinking about while they was answering, then we can kind of come back to answer choice A and understand that. So for B, $2.50, x plus 4 y equals 59, that was correct as far as representing that equation. And let's look at their explanation for answer C. It says grapes would be 12 pounds and almost 8 pounds of blueberry because I estimated that it should be half and half. So if he spent 60, he would only be able to spend 30 on each fruit. So the student is assuming that the chef used equal amounts of each one of the fruits. So I'm assuming that's where the 10x plus the 10y equals 20 pounds came from in answer choice A, and that was not the case. And lastly, with student 6, remember if on the rubric from last month that we used, if the student scored 0 points out of how many of the points that was possible, that means that the student did not demonstrate to the evaluator that they knew anything about what the question was asking. So their answer was totally irrelevant. It was completely not related to what was being asked. So just look at this one just from answer choice A. The student put y equals mx plus b. And with B, they have y equals 250x plus 4. So they was kind of getting this misunderstood as far as what was being asked. As far as writing those representations, they were just kind of focused on slope-intercept form. So once again, as a teacher, at this point for this particular student, what feedback will we be able to provide to the student that will help them to, understand what the question was asking and to help them, move forward to mastering the standard? Okay, the 10th grade standard and lesson essential question from today, it is coming from G.GRT 8, and it says use trigonometric ratios and the Pythagorean theorem to solve right triangles and applied problems. And that lesson essential question is, how do we use the Pythagorean theorem to solve right triangles and applied problems? So some standards for mathematical practice that are related to the assessment items for today is, of course, standard number 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. Once again, this is always that number 1 standard that we should be demonstrating as teachers in every one of our lessons. Standard 4, which is model with mathematics. And then standard 6, attend to precision. The assessment item for 10th grade, it says that a ladder is leaning against the side of an office building, as shown in the diagram below. So we see the building, and we see all of the different dimensions and measurements that the ladder, as far as away from the ground. It says the top of the ladder reaches a point on the building that is 16 feet above the ground. The bottom of the ladder is 4 feet from the base of the building. A says write an equation that could be used to find x, the length and feet of the ladder. B, it says use the equation you wrote in part A to find x, the length to the nearest tenth of a foot of the ladder. Show or explain how you got your answer. And then it says a second ladder that is 32 feet in length will be leaned against the same building. The bottom of the second ladder will be placed 7 feet from the base of the building. What is the height to the nearest tenth of a foot of the point the top of the second ladder will reach on the building? Show or explain how you got your answer. So once again, on the Georgia Milestones, the student will be, showing and providing an explanation. So we want them to be able to be prepared for this. So this would be that time where they can, make sure they show their work. And also make sure they're able to write the process and complete sentences of their thoughts that they use to come up with answering the question. So let's look at some strategies to address the problem. Once again, the same framework from Robert Kaplinski. What are you trying to explain or prove? What do you already know from the problem? Ensuring that the students are able to pick out those important numbers, those important details out of the problem to help them solve. What do you need to know to solve the problem? Once again, this is one of those questions where if a student is able to tell you what they need to answer the question, then it is extremely powerful and they have an idea of what is being asked. Provide all of your work while working on the problem. And then lastly, what is your conclusion and how did you reach that conclusion? Once again, this is that time where we want students to be able to articulate their thought process into writing. All right, student number 1 scored 4 points out of 4, and this is a lengthy explanation for the student. But remember, A asked the student to write an equation that could be used to find x, the length and feet of the ladder. And the student explain an equation that could be used to find x, the length of feet of the ladder is a squared plus b squared equals x squared, where a equals 16 feet and b equals 4 feet, the two dimensions that the illustration gives us. So they chose to use the Pythagorean theorem. All right, on choice B, it says use the equation you wrote in part A to find x, the length to the nearest tenth of a foot of the ladder. Show or explain how you got your answer. So the student chose to pretty much explain how they got to their answer, which is a squared plus b squared equals x squared. So they substituted 16 and the value of 4 from which was given into the Pythagorean theorem, and they solved for x and came up with approximately 16.5 feet. And their explanation of how they got it is I got this answer by using the equation for the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where in our case, c squared equals x squared. Then I filled in a with 16 and b with 4 because they are the dimensions of the triangle the ladder creates. Then I solved the equation and got approximately 16.5 feet. And then let's look at their last part, which part C says it talks about a second ladder that is 32 feet in length that will be leaned against the same building. The bottom of the second ladder will be placed 7 feet from the base, and they had to find out what the height was. And the student says, since the length of the ladder is x and the height is 32 feet, x equals 32, and since the distance the ladder is placed away from the building is b, and the distance is 7 feet, then b equals 7. The only dimensions we don't know is the height of the point of the top of the second ladder, which is a. By rearranging the equation used to find x in part b, a squared plus b squared equals x squared, I can solve the equation for a by using a squared equals c squared minus b squared. And so they came out with the second ladder is about 31.2 feet. So we see that this student had an extremely great understanding of what was being asked and how they were able to understand that they needed to use the Pythagorean theorem to find one of those missing side lengths. All right, student number 2 scored 4 points as well. May not be as lengthy as far as the explanation, but they were able to show their work. They have 16 squared plus 4 squared equals x squared is their equation that they use. B, they have 16 squared plus 4 squared equals x squared, and they went on to solve for x and came out with approximately 16.5 as well. And they also provided an explanation. I used the equation for part A. I squared both values, added them, and finally took the square root to find the value of x. And then that's how they came up with approximately 16.5 feet long. Then on C, they had to find the height of the second ladder. Once again, they identified that they were missing one of the legs, and they were provided with one of the legs as well, but then they knew that the ladder was 32 feet. And so the explanation is I used the same basic equation, but plugged in the new values. Then I solved for h. The height of in this situation was about 31.2 feet. So we see two different students approach the problem or solve the problem in two different ways, but gain the maximum number of points. All right, student number 3 scored a 3. And on part A, they have 4 plus x equals 16. And this is pretty much where their error occurred as far as not having the correct equation. Part B, we see they came up with 16.50 feet. Instead of using the equation, I used the formula a squared plus b squared equals c squared. They substituted as well and came up with approximately 16.50. And with the 31.22 feet for the second ladder, the same way. They substituted the 7 for one of the legs and 32 as the length, and they solved for B and came with approximately 31.22. So in answer A, they understood how to get the answer, but they did not understand the actual way to set up the equation, even though they used the correct formula. Student number 4 scored a 2. They have, for answer choice A, they have 4 squared plus 16 squared equals c squared, and that was their equation. They also went on to, for B, they have 4 squared plus 16 squared equals c squared, and they came up with 16 feet for the second answer. But remember that if we attend to precision, the answer adds specifically to the nearest tenth of a foot. And that is where their points may have been deducted off because they only provide a whole number for the foot answers as well as their answer in C as well. And the answer for C, if they have 32 as the length of the ladder, and then they have 7, but then their approximate, the 7 square roots of 3 was not quite what they were looking for as far as the complete answer. So they may have just made a calculation error. And the student that scored 1 point out of 4, they have a 4 squared plus 16 squared equals x squared. So they have that part correct as far as their substitute or their equation. Answer choice B is 20 feet. And they don't have any explanations. They do not have any work to show their thought process. So of course, I know this would deduct in the point value because the question specifically asked to show or explain how you got your answer. So they did not provide that. They did not provide that on C. And of course, they came up with the incorrect answers on both B and C. And then lastly, this student scored a 0. And remember, this student with the answers pretty much demonstrated to the evaluator that they did not have a clear understanding of the question, what was being asked, and how would they go about solving that question. So as a teacher, what feedback would you provide to the student at this time to help them? And of course, I always like to make sure that we're providing feedback to our students. We are being evaluated on our jobs. So we definitely want to see, what feedback our administrators have to say with the walkthroughs that they are conducted in our classroom. So the students have the same right to be provided with written and verbal feedback. And I would suggest that you provide that frequently. It may be every other week, but provide that frequently to the students. The feedback must be provided to tell the student their next steps in moving towards mastering the standards. So you can give statements about where they are, but then also provide the next steps for where they need to move to. Like students that have mastered the standard, what will be their next steps to moving on? And of course, use the language of the standards when providing that feedback. It's always important to look at the standard, see what the standard is stating, always reference the standard throughout your lessons. And then when you provide that feedback, the students are very aware of what you are expecting of them. And then, of course, lastly, at the end, I always provide the resources that I have used. I just highlight, of course, the Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System with their website. It is all of the elementary and middle school resources of assessment items that they have used over the years. And then, of course, the high school, it's mainly 10th grade, but that reference their courses of algebra and geometry. And of course, I just always like to tell you about the Georgia frameworks. Go back and use those in your lesson planning. You can use those as some of your constructive response or an extended response assessment items in your teaching. So I thank you again for joining me and have a great day.